Hey adapters, I'm Doug Parsons. I'm a partner at Simpatico Studios where we live stream conversations about complex business and social challenges with professionals like yourself who are working on the same issues. Our shows are live streamed in front of a global audience of your professional peers on simpatico.tv. I'm building a new type of online community for professionals like yourself on the Climate Adaptation channel. If you're a regular listener of my America Adapts podcast, I think you'll find that we're taking our conversations about important problems, policies, and solutions to the next level here. And if you're interested in being a guest, we'd love to hear from you. And now join us for this latest episode. Hey adapters, our guest today is Jigar Shah. Jigar has been deploying climate solutions at scale since he started Sun Edison in 2003. Jigar helped create Solar as a Service, a business model that has attracted over $2 trillion of capital worldwide. Jigar will introduce us to his most recent venture, Generate Capital, and shares how entrepreneurs and investors can unlock the massive potential that climate change represents. Jigar argues why business model innovation, rather than new technical innovation, is the key to attract mainstream capital and reach our near-term climate targets. Hey Jigar, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thanks for coming on, and I'm checking in with my guest. How is COVID-19 impacting what you're doing at the moment?
Well, it's difficult, right? Obviously, we're used to collaborating together in an office environment. Many of us haven't seen the inside of an office since March, and the Zoom calls can be exhausting, as you know.
Yes.
And so, it's one of those things where I think everyone's just got to be committed to continuing to use the tools and other things that are available to, really have good communication.
I know you talk about these things a lot, and I want you to talk about it here. And you've said that the United States has lost its ability to do big things. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that we've held ourselves to a very low standard, right? So it used to be that we said, hey, we're going to pass the Clean Air Act, and we have no idea how we're going to eliminate all this pollution from coal power plant stacks, but we're going to pass it anyway because we do those kinds of things, and American ingenuity is going to solve it. And we did. We solved it at 90% less cost than people were projecting, and put scrubbers on coal plants. Same thing was true with the acid rain regulations in the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments. I think what's happened more recently is we've said, look, solar and wind have to prove themselves. They have to prove that they're so cost effective that they're actually cheaper than coal. And then we'll actually decide to deploy it at scale, which is where we are today, right? Solar and wind are cheaper than coal. And now, you've got 10 states that have passed, 100% clean electricity mandates. Um, and even then, people are saying, well, maybe we should mandate it. Now that they're cheaper, they'll just naturally happen. And, unfortunately, the way infrastructure works is, you have to set these bold policy goals. You have to set these bold visions, and then you have to execute them, right? That's how this works.
Okay, not a clean energy issue, but I guess I'm surprised that after 5 months that we are not able to test better in the United States. It feels like one of these big things that we should have been able to deal with right now, and I'm actually pretty surprised. And so I guess to your point.
Oh, it's shocking. Yeah. I mean, if you feel like you have symptoms, the best you can do is to go to a local clinic, CVS or something like that, get tested. And then 6 to 9 days from now, they'll tell you whether you have COVID. You feel bad today. You want to know whether you should actually go to that picnic or go to that thing, whether you have the common cold or whether you have COVID. And now you're forced to stay inside for 6 to 9 days because you can't get a test in an hour. And the ones that do test in an hour tell you that they're only 75% accurate. So then you're like, wait a second, like, what's the point of testing? So yeah, no, it's a problem. I agree.
And that's another episode where we talk about our response. But I want you, what is Generate Capital? What are you doing there?
So Generate Capital is a large balance sheet. So we're funded by the world's largest, most sophisticated infrastructure investors. And what they've realized is that solar and wind are now, mainstream. And but there are parts of solar and wind that aren't. So, for instance, in solar, community solar, commercial, industrial solar, affordable housing solar, et cetera, are not mainstream yet. But more importantly, there are lots of other technologies that are fully mature, but aren't mature on the financing side. So things like hydrogen fuel cell forklifts from Plug Power, or electric vehicle buses from BYD, which is quite mature but not mature on the financing side, or behind the meter battery storage, or anaerobic digesters. There's 1,800 of them operating in Germany and Italy, but less than 30 or 40 operating commercially in the United States. And so people are afraid of financing them here. So Generate unlocks all of that entrepreneurial energy by giving people, a pathway by which to really capitalize those projects.
So, what is one of your more successful arguments, though? It seems there are maybe some complexities to this that you're trying to explain to investors. What's really been an successful pitch for you?
Well, the pitch is that we're actually not taking a lot of risk, right? That ultimately the reason why solar and wind projects work is four reasons, right? One is that the technology works, right? We're not experimenting on new technology. Two, there's a contract with someone to buy what we're producing, right? Electricity or whatnot. Three, we have the feedstock figured out, right? And so in wind's case, it's free. The sun is free and the wind is free. In our anaerobic digesters, we actually have to get food waste from manufacturers. And four, there's someone that's competent that can actually maintain the infrastructure and make sure it works, right? That's the formula, right? And so if that formula is met, we're happy to fund. If it's not met, it's harder to fund, right? And I think the investors, said, okay, we get it, but show us a little bit what you're doing. So they gave us a little bit of money in 2014, and then a little bit more in 2015, a little bit more in 2017, and now we raised over $1 billion last year.
Right, so you mentioned solar's mainstream now. Think about sort of the history and even the government involvement with this. You look at the big stimulus package when President Obama was there. Did that influence where solar is today, those investments? I mean, there was a lot of actually negative news associated with it, but at the end of the day, was it driving down prices? Well, how did that play into what's happening today?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, obviously, solar has been on a trajectory of support since the late 1990s, right? With Japan and Germany, and then Spain, and then China, and then India, and other places in the US, California, et cetera. And so in 2009, when the stimulus bill got passed and over $90 billion worth of money went into clean energy, from weatherization of homes to solar refundable tax credits and that kind of thing. A lot of state programs said, well, gosh, if we're going to get all this support from the federal government, we should match their programs with programs on our side so we get those jobs in our state. And, the states that actually proactively brought programs together, North Carolina, Georgia, Massachusetts, New York, et cetera, got a huge amount of job growth, right? So, the solar industry hired, the clean energy industry hired one out of every 10 blue collar workers from 2009 to 2016. It's a big number.
Okay, yeah, that's one of my questions. That is a huge number. Why isn't that narrative out there more? You think of a tiny group of like coal miners and the amount of coverage that they get even from the mainstream media. One out of every 10 jobs, that is a big deal. Is it just not a cohesive enough group of people to kind of create those narratives?
I think the narrative is getting out there. I think I mean, 75% of all new electricity in the United States of America since 2015 has come from clean electricity. So it's not like we've been slouches, and certainly a lot of that's happened. I think the challenge is that when you're taking something away from somebody, it's more newsworthy than when you're giving somebody something, right? So when you think about like coal, right, the fact that coal plants are being shut down is more newsworthy than solar and wind plants being constructed. um, so it's sort of is what it is. But I would say that when you think about states like Wyoming and Oklahoma, where they had legislators who were actively trying to persuade people from leaving their state, solar wind developers from leaving the state, the rest of the legislature and the governor's offices came back in and said, wait a second, we want that economic development here. And now you see major support for renewable energy in Oklahoma and Wyoming because we put $3 billion into each of their states in new projects.
Well, you're not having an issue with investors, but do you get to have those conversations with policymakers? Is this an easier sell these days? Are you out there? You're in DC. I mean, people are talking about it.
Sure. I mean, the Democratic field were arguing with each other for the first time on who was more green, right? Jay Inslee came out with his plan, and then Elizabeth Warren, after Jay Inslee fell out, said, I'm going to hire your staff and make the plans even better. And then, I mean, Biden had one of the weakest plans coming into the primary season, and now he's basically got one of the best plans that was ever presented with $2 trillion over 4 years. So from that perspective, I think it's good. And then from the perspective of even local and politicians, I think a lot of mayors, a lot of Congress people. I mean, Sean Casten in Illinois' sixth district, he was the first politician that I know of that ran on climate change. He said climate change is the largest wealth creation opportunity of our lifetime, and I'm running on it to make sure it comes back to Illinois 6. I don't know of any other politicians. I mean, there's a lot of folks who support clean energy, but I don't know of any other politicians that actually ran on climate change and won as part of the economic development story. But I think ever since Sean won in 2018, now you've got 20 or 30 more politicians that have done the same. And so, from that perspective, I think you have 7 Republican senators who recently came forward with this COVID, stimulus bill, and said, "Hey, we want to make sure renewable energy is a part of this because it's a big economic driver in our state." And so, I think policymakers are getting it right. We're investing between 100 and 150 billion dollars a year in U.S. infrastructure, and a lot of politicians want to make sure that that comes back to their district.
I don't know if you saw it. I think it was about a week ago, but I'm pretty sure the Washington Post did a story about the evolution of the Biden climate plan, and I thought it was just a fascinating article to really just, working with the committees and how it influenced him. And I think people are giving the benefit of the doubt that he's being sincere, that, he's really going to take all these different voices. I'm not sure if you read that, but it was just a fascinating kind of journey how he got there.
Yeah, it was a fabulous piece, right? And I think look, I think politicians are supposed to be politicians, right? They're not supposed to be activists for climate change or activists for clean energy, right? And so my sense is that Biden looked at all the math and said, you know what, this is good, right? These guys are actually working, they're creating jobs, they're actually creating tax revenue for the federal government because they're employing all these people. And the utility companies and the state policymakers, everybody else actually thinks that this stuff's cost effective. And oh, by the way, it's supposed to have all these health benefits, right? So it's reducing asthma rates, it's reducing other health impacts on the ground. And so I think he looked at it and said, you know what? Like, I don't know that when I looked at this in 2008, I saw the same conclusion. But now that it's 2020, I do see this conclusion that this is a good idea. It's an idea whose time has come. And so it's not surprising to me that after seeing all that information, that the poll numbers came in super positive. I mean, even Republicans are 50-50 for clean energy. That he said, the water feels warm. It's time to dive in.
Yeah, I don't know if you read David Roberts out of Vox, but he keeps these issues on us around clean energy, and he's kind of followed it really closely. He's been a good person to kind of monitor to see how presidential candidates and such have been following this.
Yeah, he's a good friend. He's a smart guy.
Yeah, I had him on the podcast once, and he is a character. Yeah, he's not shy with his opinion. Great guy.
No.
All right, so I want to jump back into some of the stuff that you're doing, and you've argued that business model innovation rather than new technical innovation is the key to attract mainstream capital. So, what do you mean by that?
Well, so when you think about the way that we're, rolling this out, I think people have the wrong point of view, right? Their point of view is the 1990s dot-com bubble, and they're saying, oh, all these people were creating, ideas on napkins, and they were going to venture capitalists and getting funded, and isn't that great, right? That's not what we are. The clean energy industry is electricity, water, sewer, transport, right? Agriculture, marine, right? So we are actually part of infrastructure. Infrastructure is a $5 to $8 trillion a year business, right? That's all the road widening projects that are, happening, and all the buildings that are getting constructed and all that stuff, right? That's what we are. And the people who finance $5 to $8 trillion a year in that stuff want stuff that works, right? They want to put 40-year financing in place for a wastewater treatment plant. They want to put 40-year financing in place for an electricity power plant, right? Now we have technologies today that we invented in the 1970s that are now totally proven, that are better than the stuff that we're replacing, right? We have wastewater treatment technologies now that use 90% less energy and have 90% less pollution, right? And it replaces stuff at half the cost, right? But people are saying, well, but this old stuff worked for my grandparents, and so I might as well do the same thing over again. Why would you pay double for something that's 90% better in every way, right? And so that's the market that we're chasing. We're chasing $5 to $8 trillion. The rules of that game are that you need to figure out a way to have no technology risk, and you need to have offtake agreements, and you need to know where your feedstock's coming from, and you need to know who the operator is that is world class that's going to make sure that the stuff's working and maintained properly, right? And so I don't know that what I'm saying is completely out of left field, as much as it's completely out of left field for the people who are been listening to the VC community in California, right? But for the folks who've actually been part of the infrastructure community, right, it's been the same thing, right? Like, give us stuff that works. We're spending billions of dollars in our local community, trillions of dollars as a country, and we want to make sure this stuff works, and we want to like figure out new and better ways of procuring it, right? So that's where business model innovation comes from. So it's either public private partnerships, power purchase agreements, service agreements, right? People don't want to buy the stuff, they want to buy the things that the stuff does, right? So they don't want to buy solar electricity generators, they want to buy a just solar electricity, right? And that's the innovation that we've done, is we've been able to sell people the services that they want, and not the equipment.
Okay, so I think related to this is that you have a phrase, it's simple, not easy. Right? And what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about, like, well, how do we solve recycling, right? Well, today there's robots that'll actually sort all the garbage. You can go into single stream facilities in Sweden, and you put all the garbage from the garbage truck into one place. You don't have to sort it, you don't have to do anything, and it'll sort it for you, and then sort it into 13 different streams. And then, and then you can recycle the cans, you can recycle the plastic, you can recycle this. The rest of the stuff gets digested, and this stuff goes in the landfill. That technology is known. It's been deployed for 20 years, right? So it's simple, right? But it's not easy, right? Here, where I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, the county executive is anti the incinerator that Covanta runs, right? I said, well, that's easy to solve, or I mean, simple to solve, right? You just put in one of these sorting facilities from Sweden. I introduced him to the Swedish, embassy, and introduced him to the Danish embassy. I'm like, here you go. Here are the technologies, right? He's like, oh, that's so hard. I don't know how to do that. Like, these guys hate me. I got to figure this out. I'm like, yeah, it's not easy, right? It takes political leadership to actually get this stuff done. But you asked me whether we actually had a technology that could solve your problem, move away from the incinerator towards something that's more sustainable. The answer is yes. The technology's out there and it's proven. Here's all the stuff, right? Like, more recently, they said, well, we want to digest all the food waste in the county because 19% of our landfill volume is food waste. Well, why would we be burying food waste when we can turn it into compost or renewable natural gas? So they said, well, can you help us? I'm like, great. I've sent them drawings for how to do it, how much land they need, what the food waste studies show. I've sent them all the information. It's pretty simple, right? But it's not easy to get them to issue an RFP to actually get the, anaerobic digester built. So,
Hmm.
like, that's where I think we need to focus is, like, we've got solutions, but now we've got to get leadership, we've got to get public policy, and we've got to get activists to push people to get moving.
It seems like things are changing so quickly, but you look at some of the stimulus packages, they've already passed a couple and they're just debating right now. I think a lot of people, even in the clean energy space, maybe there's an opportunity here. 2 weeks ago, I think I was more optimistic than I am today that maybe they'll kind of go big even before the election. And then if Joe Biden wins the election, you could have a whole different series of, stimulus packages when he comes in. Do you have any sort of sense on what's going on right now and what would really be a good way, I guess, for clean energy to be part of those conversations?
Well, we're part of the HEROES Act, so that part's good, right? I mean, that act is obviously dead on arrival in the Senate, and we're not part of the CARES Act, and so, now we got to figure, or the HEAL Act, I guess, HEAL Act, and so, like, we got to figure it out, right? Like, I mean, the bottom line is, I don't think either Democrats or Republicans have been focused on stimulus. They've been focused on remedies, right? COVID funding, unemployment insurance, all of the things necessary to really meet the pandemic head on, which I support. But, like, even when you think about the PPP loans and all the other stuff that people were talking about, that's all for businesses that are in trouble. For businesses that actually see opportunity, like us, who could actually grow faster, there's been nothing proposed to help us. We just go to the normal private sector and raise money, right? And the private sector is obviously less generous as it was before because they're all scared of their own shadow. So they've gotten conservative. You can imagine you could create something like co-victory bonds that gives us access to, money from the Federal Reserve or any place else that's got money to give, and provides it to us at a lower interest rate than we normally would be able to borrow at. And we'd be able to do good stuff with it. We'd be able to create more jobs, put more steel in the ground, and actually help stimulate the economy. But that hasn't been a priority, I think, really, for either side. Obviously not. The Democrats put it in the Heroes Act, but in a way that I don't think they're fighting for now in terms of getting a deal done.
Do you have any thoughts on climate adaptation? Carbon mitigation, carbon emissions have really been the sort of center of climate change discussions, but is it an area of investment that you're seeing more of, that you're getting involved in? Like, we're adapting to sea level rise, we're adapting all these things. Is
Sure.
what's going on in that respect in like your
Well,
space?
clearly there's some people doing adaptation now, right? Just around backup generators, right? I mean, you have public safety shutoffs, and you've got flooding and all sorts of things, and people are losing power on a more frequent basis. And so folks are putting in, backup generators. And so we're saying, well, instead of making it diesel, why don't we use EPA compliant natural gas generators? And then some people are saying, forget that, we're going straight to solar plus storage, right? Which is great, right? So we're doing some of that stuff. Look, I think a lot of the adaptation, frankly, is penny wise, pound foolish stuff, right? So it's basically saying there are little things you can do to your homes, little things you can do to your infrastructure to make it more resilient against flood damage, more resilient against fire damage, more resilient against other natural disasters that are more frequent and harsher. Hurricane season that we're in now. And the insurance industry, frankly, has just been really slow at mandating this stuff, right? Part of this is basically the insurance industry has been raising insurance premiums by 10% a year, which is unconscionable, but it's what they're doing. And what they could be doing is saying, actually, we're going to raise it 10% a year. But if you make these adaptation fixes to your home, well, then, we'll leave your premium the same because you're going to save us a lot of money in the future when a disaster occurs. But they frankly haven't been leading in this area in the US. They've been leading in Canada and Europe and other places, but not in the US.
All right, so I want to pivot here. We're going to sort of end this episode here, and we have some questions submitted, and I want to transition to that. So hold on just a sec. Jigar's now going to answer your questions about innovations and investment in sustainable energy, transportation, water, waste, and agricultural industries. Many of our entrepreneur members that operate in these areas have pre-submitted questions, but we'll also be taking questions from the live chat. So if you're out there, please, I see those questions, but please don't be afraid to ask. So let's just transition into that. And Jigar, I'm going to ask you this first question here from Bill Nussey, CEO and co-founder of Solar Inventions. Why invest in clean tech now? We've sort of been talking about it. How is it different than the clean tech bust of 2011?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? I mean, since the COVID crisis, oil and gas stocks are down 40% and clean energy stocks are up 31%. So, I think there's a lot of folks who believe that the government commitment to building back better, right, and to actually building green is real, right? You saw the regulations in the European Union where the European Union actually said, hey, we're actually going to restrict the amount of money we give you for support for COVID unless you adopt all these green measures, right? I think you see that for the first year ever, new coal plants were dwarfed by retiring coal plants. So we actually had a net reduction in coal plants this year, and we expect that to continue for the rest of time. And that's because India has basically, abandoned all of their new coal plants, and China is doing the same. So I think you're seeing a tremendous amount of broad institutional support for clean energy. So it's not just this is going to be awesome. It's like it currently is awesome. And so I think you're starting to see just a lot of institutional support for clean energy, and you see that with stock price increases, and you also see that with governors and mayors and university presidents putting out requests for proposals and whatnot for clean energy.
I guess it depends on what kind of investor you are too. I mean, there's always a chance something might go bust in the short term, but this whole overall framework around climate change, we need to kind of move to clean energy. And I think most countries and companies recognize that. And so if you're a long-term investor, and so, yeah, that must be sort of the conflict there. It's like, well, what's our sort of short-term investor strategy versus like.
Yeah, I think that's right. But remember in 2011, right, the Obama administration was still saying we're all the above and it's all about natural gas all the time, right? So
Okay, right,
you could imagine that you didn't really see the level of institutional support that you see today. And so it's just, I mean, I think, look, we've grown up as an industry and we're just in a different place.
Okay, I got a question from Laura Zapata, co founder of Clearloop. Please react to the crux of our argument, which is that today's corporate climate accounting rules have completely stripped renewable energy from carbon reductions. That has caused the majority of renewable energy projects to be built in certain parts of the country, where, in parentheses, where there is a high wholesale price of energy or regulations, which leaves the middle part of the country getting left behind without access to clean energy.
Oh, she's right. Look, I mean, I think that what's happened is that most of the renewable energy projects in this country are built in places that invite renewable energy developers to participate. And so that is not, the coal heavy Midwest or MISO or some of these other places, right? So it's like it's not in places like Nebraska or other places, right? And so what's happening is that the renewable energy projects are built where people are inviting them in, let's say North Carolina. And then you've got corporates that are saying we want to be 100% renewable energy, so they're taking up projects that are three quarters developed and saying, "Hey, we'll guarantee you that we'll buy all the power, and we'll do that through this contracts for differences, and that gives you the credit profile to be able to get bank financing for the project, right?" But they're building it wherever the project is already developed, right? Not necessarily right next door to their facility. So their facility might be in Omaha, and the project that they're buying power from is in North Carolina. Well, that's not quite fair, right? Like you should be building projects closer to home in Nebraska, but that requires the Midwest, um, um, interstate sort of system operator to actually, be nice about allowing renewable energy to be built in their territory. And so I think that's getting fixed slowly but surely. I think it's getting fixed, but she's right that it's a big problem, and I'm glad to see her company doing a lot of great work to fix it.
I don't know if you even know this, but you think of a country like Germany that's big on solar. I mean, they have states there, but it's obviously a much smaller geographic region than the United States. But do they have this sort of federalistic issues, like states in the United States make it harder, or is it more integrated there? Is it sort of the national government sort of setting all that policy?
Well, it's a lot more integrated, right? Remember, the state of California has roughly the same size economy as Germany. So, Germany, you just consider the state of California. I mean, California's got Northern California, Southern California, you've got like Fresno, you got Bakersfield, you got all these different parts of California, but they still operate as one state most of the time. So,
Right.
I mean, I think, Germany and a lot of countries of Europe are basically the same size as US states, right? The EU is the same size as the United States, a little bit bigger actually, economically. But, but each individual country within the EU is like a state in the United States.
Okay, question from Bhaskar Diol, co-founder of EDRV and co-founder of Minergy. What are your views on EV charging infrastructure in the US, EU, and emerging markets?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, right? And I think it's going to be different in every single place. I mean, I do think that the standards are starting to harmonize. The EU is taking a very hard stance on what standards they want to allow Tesla to sell there, et cetera. And so that's caused Nissan and many other folks to say, okay, fine, whatever standard the EU picks is what we'll actually, use, which has been good. The US hasn't yet adopted the same standards, but I think that the US is getting there. I mean, the beauty of the US is a couple things, right? One is that we have 60 million people, 60 million households in the United States where you have a dedicated place to park your car, right? So either a garage or a driveway or some other place, right? So the vast majority of those people can charge at home, right? So they plug in and they charge at home. And the other thing is that the vast majority of those households also have more than one car. So to the extent that they feel like there is not enough EV charging infrastructure for them to take a 14-hour drive for a vacation, then they drive their other car, right? And so the EV infrastructure in the United States is not yet holding us back. We're still seeing record amounts of EV sales and record amounts of new EV models coming out because most people charge their EVs at home with level two charging. Right now, we are catching up, right? EVgo just announced their partnership with General Motors. Tesla's always had a great nationwide charging network. Electrify America is putting their own stuff out. Many utility companies have finally got religion and started putting stuff out. So I think we're getting there. And I think, frankly, the fact that we waited as long as we did means that most of the infrastructure we're putting in is actually going to survive the test of time. Had we put in a bunch of stuff last year, it would have been the wrong standard, and then people would have had to spend a lot more money to fix it. So I think the US is right on time in terms of putting infrastructure in, and that's going to be in the next 3 to 4 years.
Okay, I got a question from the chat room. Here it's from Mike. How quickly do you observe the cost of implementing solar to residential homes falling? It's gotten a lot better. How much more affordable can it get?
A lot. So in Australia, for instance, they install solar at about $1.15 US dollars per watt. In much of Europe, it's about $1.30, $1.40 a watt. In the United States, financed solar PV systems average about $3.25 a watt. So it's a lot more. It's about 3 times the cost of Australia. Now, cash payers in the United States pay about 250 a watt for residential solar. So cash payers save about 70 cents a watt. And so a lot of people are starting to get loans from their credit card company, from their local bank, et cetera, and just paying cash for solar as opposed to going through finance providers. And then you're starting to get a lot of great innovations like Solar App and other folks who basically are automating the permitting process. So these are fully in use in Europe and Australia, where you literally push a button and all of the standards get put into the solar design. The solar design gets submitted via the app and gets approved via the app, and you save 99% of the cost. And
Wow.
so that stuff is already available. The U.S. Sets its policy by city and town, not even by state. So in California, every city and town has its own rules on how to permit solar, and so that's an added cost. And then you've got the customer acquisition costs. But look, I think that there are ways to get to 250 a watt for finance solar systems really quickly. I think when you look at the innovations in financing, there's ways to really cut out all that fat, that 70 cents a watt that cash payers are currently saving versus financing. I think the financing can match cash paying prices. So I think that'll come very quickly. And then I think, once a 30% tax credit expires for residential, which is coming up any day now, then I think you're going to end up seeing the residential solar industry magically innovate to getting far more cost competitive than they are today.
Okay. I have a question from Alexi Levine, founder of Desolinator. What do you think what do you think post-pandemic sustainable development will look like? Who will fill the venture capital gap?
Well, I don't know. I don't know exactly what he's referring to on the venture capital gap. Like, in my opinion, we have more venture capital today than we've ever had supporting the clean energy industry. So I
Okay.
think we're fully covered on clean energy. I think the part that we have a problem with is development capital. So, like, if someone wants to pitch your city or town project and they need to spend $800,000 completing that development work, they either have to have the money or they need to find an investor that'll invest that $800,000 for the promise of getting paid back 3 times their money back if the project moves forward. And that money is sorely lacking. And in the Biden plan, there's actually some money for that from the federal government, where the federal government will provide subsidized loans to all these developers to develop these projects in their communities. And then once the projects get constructed, then the federal government gets paid back with interest.
Okay. I love this next question from Tejas Sidnal, founder of Carbon Craft Design. How do you acquire talent? How do you know they are driven? And is Generate Capital funding building material startups? And do you have any plans to expand in India? This
It's
leading
a good
series of
question.
questions. Leading
Uh,
series, yeah.
we don't plan on expanding to India right now, not because it's a bad place to do clean energy, but just because we're focused on North America mostly, and then we're expanding slowly into other geographies. I think that in general, the building material space is a huge space. And so we're seeing a ton of startups in the United States as well as other places around, really taking out the carbon out of building materials. So when you think about like wood construction, there are now wood construction approaches where you can build a 8-story building with wood construction and not require all the steel that's in there or the cement for that matter, both of which are very high carbon industries. And so you can dramatically reduce carbon emissions by, using wood construction. And so I think that like that whole industry sector is going to take off like a rocket ship over the next few years. And so wish you a lot of luck.
And did you want to say anything to even I guess within your organization, how you're kind of potentially recruiting people? Is there any sort of particular way you're doing that?
Well, we just hire smart people, right? And we make them work across power and water and building materials and other things. And so, certainly there are people who have expertise in building materials. And, if that's what their background is and we need it at the time, we might, hire those people. But we generally just hire people who are, creative and, sufficiently skeptical, who, like to review hundreds of pages of documents and try to figure out, what the right answer is.
More people like that in government. Here's just a follow-up question, just from what you said earlier about that solar app in Australia. What was the name of that? We want to track that.
I think it's called Solar App. I think it's I'll look it up here real quick, but I think it's called Solar App.
We could look that up too. That's someone they're listening. And here's a question from Diego Saez Gil, CEO of Pacama. What role do you see carbon credit markets playing in generating financial capacity for communities to tackle climate change?
Yeah, it's a tough thing, right? I mean, in general, I'd say that the it is called Solar App, by the way,
Okay, great. Thanks.
APP. But look, it's a tough thing, right? We've been looking at carbon credit markets, whether it's the RED program to save forests or other things, for a long time. And frankly, I think that the jury is out. A lot of folks don't believe that those programs really worked in the way that they were intended to work. And so I think we need to like stop necessarily trying to find market-based solutions for things that aren't market-based. And I think that's part of the whole concept of the Green New Deal. And so there are areas where we just need to be supporting development. So we need to triple the budget for USAID and triple the budget for some of these Peace Corps initiatives and other things where people just need to get skills transfer, or people need investment in their communities locally, so that you don't get a lot of climate refugees, right? And so my sense is a lot of this is really just we need to focus less on carbon markets, because I think they've had mixed results, and focus more on figuring out how to put more money into development.
Okay, so I just got a couple more questions, but I'm going to let you go. What do you see as the biggest challenges for climate tech companies in 2020 and beyond?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is what it's always been, which is discipline, right? Most climate tech companies can use their technology 17 different ways. And oftentimes the reason they go out of business is they try all 17 ways at the same time. And so I think it's really more about really focusing on product market fit, finding the smallest niche that has the largest economic delta for you, right? Where you're saving the customers the most money. That's the other thing, is a lot of folks, for instance, like remember like the Solazymes of the world and the others who are using algae to create, new molecules. They were making tons of money, hands over fist, on waxes and paraffins, right? But someone told them, well, the market for gasoline and diesel is much bigger, so chase that. Well, the profit margins there are much smaller too. They end up going bankrupt as a result, right? Had they focused on waxes and paraffins and created a profitable business, and then slowly grew their business, they would have been more successful. And that also is true for like A123 batteries. They were making tons of money supporting Black and Decker, sort of power tools. And then, someone said, oh, you need to like do electric vehicles. And, they started losing money hand over fist. And so I just think people need to be careful about making sure they focus on the markets that are the most profitable for them and growing in ways that are sustainable.
Okay, last question. This is mine. Your podcast. Who was, I guess, your most recent guest, and who's coming up?
Oh, well, our podcast is a trio, myself, Stephen Lacey, and Catherine Hamilton. So we rarely have guests. We mostly
Oh,
just
that's right.
do the three of us. I think, and we just, it's called the Energy Gang Podcast. It's hosted by Wood Mackenzie, and it's a lot of fun. We've been doing it for, I think, since 2012, maybe 2013, and it's gotten a lot of listeners around the world, and so we're very excited to be able to provide that service to people.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the most popular. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you had the three of you. I'm sure that keeps you busy, and I'm sure you're very responsive to the news too. That must be fun. You just flip on record, and you guys kind of just.
Yeah, we try to rip things out of the headlines, right? Just to make it, and the goal is really to try to provide people some context. So you find that like a lot of the news these days is very dry, and you don't really get the inside scoop and the inside story about, what it really means. So we try to provide that insight.
Most of the news today makes my head hurt, but for very, very bad reasons. All right, Jigar, I'm going to let you go. This has been fantastic. We want to extend an open invitation to you. At any point you want to come on, there's other topics that we need to drill down into. Please, Simpatico, we want this to be a place that we see you regularly.
Well, I love this platform. I really am very glad that you're doing it, and I'd be happy to be on anytime.
All right, excellent. Again, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks.